are you? And where are you going? What do you want?
Hello, and welcome to Business Lessons from the Military. I've been off for the last couple of weeks for the Jewish holidays, and so now I'm back doing live episodes and heading into my favorite time of the year, fall, and then, of course, into winter. So Halloween is coming up in, about a week and a half, 2 weeks, and then into Thanksgiving and Christmas and New Year's. So it's good to be back, and thank you for joining me today. So today's show, I'm going to talk about the Battle of Lake Erie, which took place 212 years ago, last month, actually. And it was a signal victory on the part of Oliver Hazard Perry and the nascent United States Navy. The Navy at that point was only a little over 30 years old. It was young, yet it challenged the British Navy, which was by far the most powerful navy in the world at that time. And it also helped turn the tide in the War of 1812, which is also sometimes known as the Second American Revolution or the Second War for Independence. So, give you a little background to the battle and what happened. So, as I mentioned just a moment ago, the battle took place during the War of 1812, which, as you might guess, started in 1812. So it was the war was fought over a number of issues. One of them was the United States was extremely angry at the British practice of stopping non-British ships going on board and taking away sailors that the British deemed to be British subjects, a practice known as impressment. So, because the United States was a relatively new country in the early 1800s, and because a lot of the people who lived in the United States in the early years of the country were of English descent, if not actually from England. So the American ships in particular were kind of easy pickings from the British standpoint for the impressment of sailors. And from the American standpoint, they were now American citizens. They were no longer subjects of Great Britain, but in many cases, British ship captains ignored that issue and took these sailors away anyway. And so one of the issues, again, over which the War of 1812 was fought was impressment. Another was free trade. So again, the Great Britain being the most powerful naval force, one of the things it sought to do was restrict trade to its benefit. And so the United States often found itself on the losing end of the free trade battle. And in fact, one of the slogans that came out of the War of 1812 was free trade and sailors' rights, naming those two issues as crucial among those over which the War of 1812 was fought. Now, from the United States perspective, there was a third issue, and that was there was a group within the United States who felt that the United States should essentially take over Canada and expel Great Britain from essentially the balance of its holdings in North America. And this is where the Great Lakes became a battleground because there was a contemplated invasion essentially of Canada by the United States. And of course, the British sought to repulse that invasion. And so much of that conflict was fought over the Great Lakes. So at the age of hold on to your pants, 27, Oliver Hazard Perry was given command of the U.S. naval forces on Lake Erie. And this was after the British had dominated this region early in the war, cutting off the U.S. access to the Northwest. So Perry was given the job of uh, rapidly building a fleet on Lake Erie with which to face the British. And so he ended up building a fleet of 9 ships, small ships. He built them at Presque Isle Bay, which is essentially near Erie, Pennsylvania, including his flagship, the Lawrence, and another ship called the Niagara. He used local timber and minimal resources, and he was often under attack by the British as he was building this fleet. So if you can imagine, it was very difficult circumstances in which Perry built out his little fleet. The British squadron on Lake Erie was commanded by Captain Robert Heriot Barclay. It was smaller at 6 vessels, but it was more experienced than the American fleet, than the sailors and officers in the American fleet. It was the case, though, that in total firepower, which was essentially at that time measured by the size and number of cannons and carronades that were carried on ships. So the Americans did have more total firepower and a larger number of ships, but they were less experienced than the British. So the battle took place on September 10th, 1813. And the fleets, or the squadrons, really, fleets is kind of a grand term for what were 6 and 9 small ships each. But they met at Put-in Bay, Ohio. Lawrence's flagship, the Lawrence, initially bore the brunt of British fire, and it suffered heavy damage and casualties, including most of her crew. So at one point, the Lawrence became essentially disabled. It was dismasted. It could not navigate any longer. And so Perry realized he had to move his flag to another ship. He decided to move it to the Niagara. And in a small boat, he and his few remaining shipmates rode through heavy British gunfire to the Niagara, carrying his battle flag, on which was inscribed the now famous slogan, "Don't give up the ship." And this sort of daring transfer of his flag really turned the tide of battle, because the sailors on the other American ships saw their commander risking danger, risking death to continue to lead them. They saw his battle flag, "Don't give up the ship," flying from this small boat, and it gave them renewed confidence. It boosted their morale to keep fighting. So once on board the Niagara, Perry re-engaged with the British squadron, breaking through their line. Okay, and again, in those days, battles were fought sort of ships in line. I'm not going to get into that. That's a talk for another day. But by breaking through the British line, he forced the entire enemy fleet to surrender. And this was the first time in history that an entire British naval squadron had been captured. So it was not only a tremendous victory for Oliver Hazard Perry and the nascent United States Navy, it was in many ways a crushing defeat for the Royal Navy, because they had never suffered this kind of defeat before, and it really showed the growing ability and confidence of the American Navy and its leadership, and it proved to the British that the American Navy could and would stand toe to toe with it in defense of American interests. Now, at the time, the Royal Navy was a truly worldwide navy, whereas the American Navy was not. So the American Navy was not looking to challenge the Royal Navy, throughout the seven seas, so to speak. But when it came to advancing American interests, then indeed the the Battle of Erie, Pennsylvania, the Battle of Lake Erie, um, proved to the Royal Navy and the British government that indeed the U.S. Navy was a formidable foe. So, the aftermath of the victory is Perry sent a succinct and now absolutely legendary dispatch to General William Henry Harrison, and it had just I think 8 words: "We have met the enemy, and they are ours." One, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight, 9 words. Just 9 words, right? But this redounded throughout American military history, whereas typically, fairly long, involved after action reports would be sent. In Perry's case, he sent just this 9 word message. And it really inspired, again, not just the United States Navy, but the United States military in general, that this plucky little 9 boat squadron had defeated the great Royal Navy, and that its young commander was so bold, so confident, and just exuding the spirit of the young nation that was the United States of America. So, the victory gave the United States control of Lake Erie. It allowed General Harrison to retake Detroit in the Michigan Territory, and it directly led to the defeat of British and Native American forces at the Battle of the Thames, and it's securing the Northwest Territory of the United States as an American possession. So Perry became a national hero, as did, by the way, William Henry Harrison, who was elected to the presidency later. A little bit later, he unfortunately served in office only 6 months before dying. Perry did not have a political career, but he was nonetheless a national hero. And as I mentioned before, his victory demonstrated the growing skill and confidence of the young United States Navy, and it really cemented his motto, "Don't give up the ship," as a symbol, even to this day, of American resolve. You will at times see a battle flag with the motto, "Don't give up the ship," on American ships. I believe it last happened during the Second Gulf War. Ships were authorized to fly. It's typically it's a blue flag with the words in white on it. You know what? I think I actually have I should have brought down my little miniature 3 by 5 inch flag to show you what it looks like. But in any event, it remains a vital motto of especially the United States Navy to this day. So that's the history of the Battle of Lake Erie. Let's look now at some business lessons that we can learn from Perry's really astonishing accomplishment. So, first of all, build with what you have, not with what you wish you had. Okay, so Perry lacked manpower, he lacked resources, he lacked infrastructure, and yet he built his little fleet of 9 small boats from local timber using raw materials under siege without what are called ways, which is the sort of harbor type facilities that are normally used when you're doing shipbuilding. And his ships were plucky, they got the job done. Okay, so he focused on what he had, not what he didn't have or wished he had. In contrast this with, among others, General Meade in the Civil War, who was the commanding general of the Army of the Potomac, who would sit in camp endlessly, making ever more demands of the War Department and President Lincoln to prepare for battle, rather than taking what he had, figuring out how to use it effectively, and taking the fight to the Confederacy. So Meade ended up his career in essentially ignominy, whereas Oliver Hazard Perry stands today still as one of the great heroes in American history. So here's the reality, and we live in a country of such plenty uh, that I think we forget this. Creativity is more likely to come from constraints than it is to come from abundance. Because when we have to overcome constraints, we have to figure out creative ways in which to do that. And so, uh, that, from a business standpoint, we are much better off putting the creative power of our team to work on a problem than fretting over what we might view as insufficient resources in order to accomplish whatever goal or task with which we've been given. So it's a very important mindset, and one that uh, the reason I'm talking about this first is I think it undergirds so many other issues in business. And while uh, so this show, for example, is an outgrowth of that idea. So if you've ever seen any of the original seasons of the Way to Wow show, the first 2 seasons, it was a much more elaborate production. I converted my living room once a month into a TV studio, and we brought in a pretty full crew. My longtime producing partner Rick Carter was directed the show. I produced it. We had our regular cameraman Steve there. We had our sound guy. We had our we had a production coordinator, we had craft services, and I had a wardrobe coordinator as well. And you might think, oh my God, could you possibly afford all that? Well, I mean, we did it relatively inexpensively, which is why we shot all the shows, or we shot multiple shows, 4 to 8 shows on the same day. But the time and energy it took was a lot. Okay, I would have loved to have continued that show, but due to some personal things that happened in my life, I couldn't. And so, rather than, um, you know, not doing the show until I could afford to do it in that elaborate way, I shut down and figured out a new way to do it, and hence the current version of the Way to Wow shows in a podcast format came into be. So I built with what I had, not with what I wish I had. Okay. And I became my own wardrobe coordinator. That's why you see me still wearing a tie to this day. Okay. So that's number one. Build with what you have, not what you wish you had. Next, prepare relentlessly before the fight. So Perry's success began months before the actual battle, and it started with meticulous planning, very rigorous training, and also putting together as well as he could the shipbuilding logistics he needed in order to build a fleet that could possibly confront and defeat the British. So, um, in this regard, and this is sort of a real life example of what later authors such as gosh, I'm going up their names. They one wrote the Horatio Hornblower series, the other wrote the uh, uh, um, Captain Jack Aubrey, and Stephen Maturin series. If you ever saw the movie Master and Commander, so in both of those fictional works, so the captains of the respective captains, Horatio Hornblower on the one hand and Jack Aubrey on the other, were well known for rigorous training of their crews, especially in gunnery. So they both would, you know, use as much of their resources as they could possibly afford for extra gunpowder and shot in order that their gun crews could practice and become maximally proficient. And in that way, when they were in battle, more of the shots would tell. And so whatever they might have used in gunnery practice was well used, since they didn't need as many shots to disable or sink a ship in an actual battle, right? So that idea on the part of the authors of those books, I think, came from the real life history of naval commanders like Oliver Hazard Perry, who again very rigorously trained his crew. And we can do the same thing in business, whether it's our people involved in sales, customer service, in actual operations, whatever it is. We can give them rigorous training. We can afford them the opportunities to go to classes, to go to conferences, to take online courses, to engage in mock sessions for training purposes. We can do all of this if we choose to, so that when it's truly crucial that they perform well, they have the training and they've had an opportunity to practice essentially in as real world as possible, and can therefore maximize their results. So, I mean, of course, you see this in the military even today, but you see, I know in whenever I do any kind of media project, well, I should say, when Rick and I do any kind of media project, so there's a tremendous amount of planning that goes on before shooting day or shooting days. So everything is scheduled out. All the equipment lists are put together. Sources from where we're going to get the equipment are identified. Um, Location rentals are secured. Equipment rentals are secured. Um, Craft services and catering are all arranged in advance. There's as little left to chance as possible. And then on the day of shooting, so we do not quote unquote roll cameras. Of course, that's a term that comes from the days when film was used. Roll video, I guess you would say. Until we, especially if there's going to be any kind of complex movement, especially complex camera movement, we will rehearse all of that first to give the cast and crew the opportunity to get used to what needs to happen, so that then when we do roll video, we can be as efficient as possible in getting what we need. Okay. And we don't, do multiple, multiple takes, which in the end creates a situation where when it comes time to edit a show or a movie or whatever we're doing, uh, now there's so much more footage to go that has to be gone through. It takes a much more time in order to edit it down, etc. So uh, again, this is just as it's de rigueur in the military. It is for people who are looking to do truly professional looking media projects. It is also de rigueur to do the meticulous planning, to do the rehearsing, the training, all in advance, so that on show day and even during show day, the best possible product and is the end result. Okay, so prepare relentlessly before the fight. Number three, lead from the front, especially in a crisis. So, when the Lawrence was dismasted and it was inevitable it was going to sink, uh, Oliver Hazard Perry did not choose to withdraw. Rather, under fire, he personally transferred to the Niagara so he could keep fighting. Okay. Now, here's the thing about leading from the front, especially during a crisis. If a leader is always leading from the front, then when it becomes crucial for that kind of outstanding leadership, or not outstanding, high profile leadership, it may not be particularly distinguishable from everyday leadership. And so a good leader knows when to empower his team, the other members of his team, to lead, and when he needs to, quote unquote, take the helm, when he needs to be the one leading from the front. And when, on those times when a crisis hits, or when it is particularly crucial activity needs to take place, when that leader steps to the front, the team can feel that. They can feel something different is happening now. Something bigger, more important is at stake. And that's why, you know, this person is now at the front and is in essence, taking over from us. Okay. So to create that impact, um, and this plays into my fourth lesson. So we need to empower successors and secondary leaders, right? So Perry's second in command, Jesse Elliott, and other junior officers played vital roles in maintaining control of the fleet and securing victory. So the fact that Oliver Hazard Perry wanted young, aggressive, smart officers throughout his squadron, okay, shows you a couple of things. One, he was preparing for the unfortunate situation where he might be killed in battle and someone else had to take over. That's number one. Number two, that he was confident in his leadership, confident enough to hear strong opinions from his subordinates to make the overall plan better. And so when you have these strong, assertive leaders throughout your team, when you step to the front, you are making an even bolder statement. Okay. Otherwise, Let them do their thing. Let them run their divisions. Let them run their departments. Give them as much space and leeway as you possibly can so that they can learn and grow when the stakes are lower, right? So that when the stakes are high, okay, they will still look to be great leaders, but great leaders in concert with where you're leading them when you step to the front. Okay, let's take a quick message break. America is a maritime nation. Our freedom and security depend on strong sea services. The Beverly Hills Council of the Navy League stands with our Navy, Marine Corps, Coast Guard, and Merchant Marine through community support, education, and advocacy. For over 120 years, Americans of all walks of life have heeded our call. No prior military service is required to join our mission. The Beverly Hills Council of the Navy League of the United States. Help us support those who serve at sea. Visit NavyLeague.org. And we're back at Business Lessons from the Military. I'm your host, Kevin Bemmel. I'm talking about the Battle of Lake Erie, fought during the War of 1812 on September 10th, 1813. The American commander was Oliver Hazard Perry. And I'm talking about the business lessons that we can learn from Perry's defeat of the British squadron on Lake Erie. And I've mentioned 4 so far. Build with what you have, not what you wish you had. Prepare rigorously and relentlessly before a fight. And then lead from the front, especially in a crisis, but empower your successors and secondary leaders so that you have strong leadership throughout your team. Okay. And I would adding on to that for just a moment, if you're a strong leader and you have a strong second in command, but your leadership ends there, okay, you have a very weak organization. So I remember back when I had my real estate company before I joined the Navy, and I used to do collateral reviews for a large lender. They did a type of lending called asset-based lending. And they sent me to do a review of a company based in Seattle, Washington. And I was there to look at several properties, but also meet with the CEO and other people who worked for the company. And although this wasn't strictly part of my my responsibility to my client, when I got back from that trip to Seattle, I went and met with my client. It was really the senior appraisal officer, a fellow by the name of David Evans, who's um, he unfortunately Dave died a number of years ago now, but Dave was extremely well known and well liked within the lending industry. So I went and sat down with Dave, and we talked about the collateral that I had reviewed, because it was a very unusual situation. And then I said to him, I said, Dave, I want to just pass this along to you. I said, I know this isn't part of my remit, but I thought you should be aware. My impression is if something were to happen to the CEO, and he is an older man, he doesn't appear to me to be in particularly robust health. I didn't meet anyone that I thought could take his place, anyone currently in the company who could take his place. And I think that's an issue. I would encourage, I would encourage you and your team to look into that issue, because what will happen to this company if the charismatic founder dies, and now it's got to keep on going, and who's going to do that, and what's going to happen if if in the meantime you've made a loan, and now you're looking to get paid back, and the ship starts to founder. And I think this is one of the reasons why, by the way, people so admired Dave Evans and liked working with him, is even though again, this wasn't anything I was involved with. He listened to what I had to say and he said, "Hey, I really appreciate you bringing this to my attention. I'm going to talk to the account manager about this, and I think you're right. We need to look into this and satisfy ourselves that there's a management team that can do this." And just to digress a little bit further, that is one of the things that they looked at, and that combined with what they felt was insufficient collateral uh, caused them to not make the loan to this particular company. I found out a few months later that one of my clients' competitors, I'd been trying to get their business for quite some time. They had ended up making that loan, and when I asked them how large a loan they made, they had actually done what's called an over advance on collateral. So if the collateral was $100 million, they had lent $110 million, which meant they were betting on the company being able to not only expand its operation but expand its profitability. In the event the company collapsed, and the loss to this lender that made the loan was so great that along with some other losses, the lender essentially went out of business. So, when we look at uh, um, secondary leaders and we look at succession in a business, I think it's an overlooked issue oftentimes, and one that we who run businesses just cannot afford to overlook. Not only because it makes us less credit worthy, but it means, look, the leader of a business doesn't have to, die for it to be a problem. The person could get injured or sick and be unable to run the business. And if the business can't run in their absence, what's going to happen? Okay, so now they've recovered, but the business now has atrophied and is, has to be rebuilt. Okay, so these are all aspects of why we as business owners, or even as someone who works for a business and is and should be advising the senior leadership of the business, this is why leadership development needs to be a broad and deep based plan within the company. Okay, so that was number 4. Number 5, adapt fast when plans collapse. So Perry's flagship, the Lawrence, was destroyed, and so he jumped into a small boat and rowed across to the Niagara, made it his flagship, and continued with the battle. Now, that is part of the Navy ethos, right? But not all commanders do that. It would be, good if, well, I shouldn't say good of it, but the fact of the matter is, um, while it is prudent to withdraw sometimes, oftentimes commanders don't need to withdraw. And again, going into some Civil War examples, there were numerous times when the Army of the Potomac should have followed up victories over Lee. I talked about this just, I think, 2 weeks ago at the Battle of Antietam. The commander there should have followed up and didn't, and so the war, continued longer rather than following up on this decisive victory. So um, one needs to adapt fast when plans collapse, or for that matter, when plans are more successful than anticipated, right? So by quickly reorganizing his command and counterattacking, uh, Perry was able to carry the day and achieve victory for the United States Navy and the United States of America. So the fact of the matter is, in business, any strategy we have is only as good as our ability to pivot when that strategy starts to founder. Okay, so flexibility under pressure often determines our success. Okay, so fealty to the original plan uh, oftentimes turns out to be the, the the wrong course. So I'll give you an example from my own career. When I had my real estate company that I started in the mid 1980s, so by the early 2000s, there had been significant changes in the marketplace. The kind of clients with which I dealt increasingly did not want to work with a small company. They wanted to work only with large companies. I mean, I used to joke with Dave about this after his organization, not against Dave's wishes, basically started using a sort of a mega company that did what I did, that they wanted to make sure they had someone with huge resources to sue in the event something went wrong. And David used to laugh and essentially agree with me, right? So the corporatizing of the business in which I was practicing, was in fact almost an existential challenge for my company. And the fact of the matter was, I did not pivot well, and lost a lot of business. And it wasn't at one point I finally realized, hey, I've got to do something different. But by then I was sort of exhausted by the whole situation, and that was when I made the decision to join the United States Navy. So while it can be difficult to anticipate problems in executing our strategy, we have to do that as well as possible. When the actual uh, barriers come up that necessitate pivoting, we have to read them and we have to do it quickly in order to stay vital. Okay, next, clarity in communication is power. So Perry's very simple dispatch to General William Henry Harrison after winning the victory, "We have met the enemy and they are ours," was clear, it was confident, and it was morale boosting. These days, communication is so easy. We can be so verbose, but oftentimes 1,000 words are far less clear than 10 words. And so I know when I write emails, one of my I've just built this into a habit. I do not press click to send until I have reread and edited that email for, among other things, clarity and brevity. So it's, I would say, 8 times out of 10, I end up pulling out more words than I add to an email, because by pulling out words, I'm sending a clearer message. Okay. Now, there is such a thing as too great brevity. Okay. And that can be an equal problem. Okay. So if you ever get an email from me, you'll always see a salutation, hi, whatever your name is, or if I'm being more formal, dear, whatever your name is, the body of my email, and then I sign off. Always, courage at all times, Kevin or Kevin Bemmel. And then of course I have the sort of marketing stuff appended to my signature. So it's very rare that I send an email that doesn't include the recipient's name in it, and my name signing off on it. So and that's because, especially if we're copying people on emails, to whom is the email actually being sent to the main recipient, and it's being sent to these other people just for so that they're in the loop, or is it being sent to all of them, right? So we want to be clear, but we want to be as brief as possible in our communications. Okay, next, own the mission, not the means, right? The Oliver Hazard Perry's mission was to defeat the British squadron and take control of Lake Erie, okay, as part of the larger mission of the United States gaining control of the Northwest Territory, okay? So when it became evident that the Lawrence was not going to be the vessel on which he did that, he abandoned the vessel and he moved to the Niagara and reorganized his little fleet and continued fighting. Okay. And that's an example that we need to follow. And there's something known as the sunk cost fallacy. Okay. So we may be pursuing a particular means for achieving a business goal. Maybe it's a commitment to a particular product to capture a particular clientele. Maybe it's a particular way of, I don't know, advertising, marketing our business, lots of things. And if we're not getting the results we are seeking, we need to change the means while owning the mission. Okay. So, going back to my example of the Way to Wow shows, when I couldn't pursue the means of a more elaborate production, okay, I had to take a step back and say, what is the mission of what is the mission of these shows? And the mission of these shows is to help people live better lives using the three pillars of attainment. Okay, that's the central mission of this show. Okay, the mission of this show is to help to give you ideas that you can use to better run your business or professional practice or even a nonprofit. The the mission of my show on Mondays, Trust and Estates Weekly, is to give you the information you need to better serve clients who are dealing with estate planning and trust and estate administration. The mission of my show on Wednesday, People Making Money, is to help you better job hunt, start and run a business, and build wealth, right? And of course, the mission at Jigger's Place every other Thursday, the mission is to help you relax and maybe learn some new ideas about life in general, right? So each show has its mission. That's what's crucial. How I meet that mission will change from time to time. Okay. And in fact, I've been thinking about some changes for the coming season in 2026. So you maybe, kind of stay tuned for that. But I'm always looking for better means to meet the core mission. Okay. All right. And then finally, number 8, and this is the last lesson I have, is turn victory into long-term strategic gain. Okay, so Oliver Hazard Perry's victory on Lake Erie, it didn't end the war, but what it did is it enabled, even inspired further victories on the part of General William Henry Harrison, among others, and it reshaped the balance of power in North America. That's not an overstatement, okay? So the British lost control of the Northwest Territory. The United States of America expanded geographically as a result, gaining additional resources, additional land, additional resources, and coming closer to fulfilling its manifest destiny, which was a country that spanned from the Atlantic to the Pacific Ocean. Okay. And so, I think it would be unreasonable to say that Perry's victory created those circumstances. It had a significant hand, along with other victors and other commanders, in creating those situations. Among them, General William Henry Harrison, who that was one, how he was viewed as a national hero was in part what allowed him to be elected president of the United States. Okay, so in business, we need to exploit momentum. And I have talked about this on other episodes of Business Lessons from the Military, but it's worth talking about again. And that is, when we launch a new initiative, for example, we need to plan to pivot if it isn't going well, but we also need to exploit its success if it really starts doing well. Okay, we don't want to be caught flat-footed with a great success and then not be able to exploit that success. So you see this sometimes with various toys, and I'm trying to think of a specific example. There was a doll that came out. I'm going up on which particular one it was, and I think it was made by Mattel. So Mattel releases this doll. It turns out to be outrageously popular, and the next thing Mattel knows, it's sold out, and it doesn't have the ability to ramp up its production, and so it lost out on a great opportunity. Now, eventually, it did get more production going, but by then, some of the momentum had been lost, right? And kids were on to whatever the next, popular toy was. So we need to be looking at our businesses, at our professional practices, and if we get the opportunity to quickly expand on a successful initiative, how are we going to do it? What resources do we need? What can we pull in order to exploit that success? And you may say, well, I mean, but I'm potentially wasting a lot of time doing that planning. Well, yes, you are. Okay, but do it as efficiently as possible, and make it as flexible as possible, so you're not having to devote a lot of resources to it. But in the event that you are given this opportunity, you'll at least have a skeleton plan of how to respond, and you will be able to take best advantage of the opportunity that's being presented to you. So those are my thoughts on business lessons we can learn from Oliver Hazard Perry's victory on Lake Erie 212 years ago. And I thank you for joining me today. As I said in the beginning, it's nice to be back broadcasting live, and I'll be doing so through the end of the year now. So I hope you'll continue to join me. I see my live viewers are there, always a treat. And I thank you sincerely for joining me today and watching the show. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. Pacific time is my show, People Making Money. And then on Thursday of this week at 5 p.m. Pacific time, we'll gather at Jiggers's place for a cocktail and a schmooze. So once again, thank you so much for joining me, and wishing you a wonderful rest of the day. Signing off as I always do. Marie, darling, you are my belle. Courage at all times, my friends.